What if the biggest royal betrayal was hidden inside one polite sentence? What if Queen Elizabeth II quietly locked a family promise into an old palace statement, then watched it sit there like a ticking time bomb for decades? And what if King Charles III almost erased it the moment power reached his hands? This was never just about a title. This was about loyalty, legacy, jealousy, control, and a dying father's final wish. Behind the gold gates and polished smiles, a storm had been building for years. The public barely noticed. The palace said almost nothing, but the clues were always there, hiding in plain sight. Go back to June 19, 1999. Cameras were focused on the wedding of Prince Edward and Sophie Rhys-Jones. It looked modest, elegant, controlled. A quieter royal wedding after the louder, messier spectacles that came before. No one realized the real drama was not in the chapel. It was in the paperwork. Because while the world admired flowers, outfits, and formal smiles, Buckingham Palace slipped out a statement so calm, so ordinary, that almost nobody understood how explosive it really was. That statement declared that the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the Prince of Wales had agreed Prince Edward should receive the Duke of Edinburgh title in due course, once it returned to the crown. Read that slowly. This was not gossip, not rumor, not tabloid smoke. This was a signed palace understanding between Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and Charles, Prince of Wales. Three giants of the monarchy placing a promise in writing, a future gift already reserved, a family debt already acknowledged. But then came the strange twist. By tradition, royal sons usually receive major dukedoms on their wedding day. Yet Edward did not walk out as a duke. He became Earl of Wessex, a title so unusual it sounded almost invented. Historians mocked it. Critics sneered. Why would a prince accept something smaller when grander titles were available? Why would the youngest son step aside from the obvious prize? Because the real prize had already been whispered behind closed doors. Edward accepted less in public because something greater had been promised in private. And where did that strange Wessex title come from? Even that story sounded bizarre. Reports claimed Edward liked the sound of it after watching Shakespeare in Love. Imagine that. A Hollywood film nudging royal history off course. A cinematic detail helping reshape the destiny of one of Britain's most symbolic titles. It sounded silly on the surface, but beneath it sat something serious: patience, sacrifice, and a delayed inheritance. Then came the deeper complication nobody outside royal circles understood. The Duke of Edinburgh title could not simply be handed over like a watch or a painting. It was tied to law, succession, and the crown itself. When Prince Philip died, the title passed first to his eldest son Charles. Then, when Charles became king, it merged back into the crown and technically ceased to exist, which meant only one man could recreate it for Edward. Only one man could honor the promise. Only one man could break it: Charles. That is where the tension became dangerous. If Charles refused, he would be ignoring the written wishes of his mother and the clear desire of his father. If he agreed, he would strengthen a younger brother many believed had quietly risen in reputation. Because by then, Edward was no longer dismissed as the forgotten son. Over years of scandals swallowing others, he and Sophie had become dependable, polished, scandal-light, useful. While other royals generated chaos, Edward generated stability. Sometimes that can create admiration. Sometimes it can create resentment. And Philip's emotional connection made it even sharper. The Duke of Edinburgh title was not empty decoration. It was bound to the Duke of Edinburgh's award, the youth legacy Philip built with pride. He had reportedly been preparing Edward to carry that mission forward for years. In other words, Edward was not just asking for a name. He was being positioned as guardian of Philip's lifework. That kind of blessing carries power inside a royal family. Sometimes more power than a crown can comfortably ignore. Then, Philip died in 2021, and suddenly the countdown began. Would Charles keep his word? Would the palace move quickly? Would the family honor the father they all publicly mourned? Instead, silence spread. And in royal stories, silence is never empty. Silence means negotiation. Silence means resistance. Silence means somebody behind the curtains is deciding what version of loyalty matters most. Reports soon emerged claiming Charles did not want Edward to receive the title. Sources whispered it would not go to him. Palace language became vague. No clear denial. No clear promise. Just that familiar royal fog where everything sounds polite while knives move underneath the table. Commentators warned the late queen would hate any reversal. Others began asking whether old sibling wounds were resurfacing. Had childhood rivalries survived into old age? Had years of comparison finally reached their most symbolic battlefield? Because make no mistake, titles inside monarchy are never just titles. They are signals. They tell the world who mattered, who was trusted, who was rewarded, who was sidelined. And for more than 2 years after Philip's death, Edward waited while the promise sat unresolved like an unpaid debt. The delay kept growing, and with every passing month, the silence looked less like caution and more like strategy. People asked the obvious question: if this promise was agreed in 1999, why was it suddenly so difficult to fulfill now? The answer may have have had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with power, because once King Charles III took the throne, every royal title became part of a larger chessboard. Every decision could shape the future image of the monarchy. Every honor could strengthen one branch of the family while weakening another. And hidden inside the Duke of Edinburgh debate was one explosive issue the palace never wanted shouted aloud: succession optics. The title itself carries enormous symbolic weight. Edinburgh is not some random label. It is tied to the capital of Scotland, a nation where independence politics had been shaking the foundations of the United Kingdom for years. To hand that title to a prince far down the line of succession could be interpreted in many ways. Some argued it might look like the crown was downgrading Scotland's importance, turning a great national title into a consolation gift for a lesser royal. Suddenly, this was no longer just brother versus brother. It was monarchy versus perception, tradition versus politics, sentiment versus survival. That may explain why Charles seemed to stall. He was not merely deciding whether Edward deserved it. He may have been calculating when the moment would be safest. Royal decisions are often presented as emotional family gestures, but timing can reveal the real motive. Then came early 2023. Nicola Sturgeon resigned, and the political atmosphere shifted. The pressure around Scottish independence looked less immediate, and suddenly, after years of hesitation, the palace moved. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. When the political weather changed, so did the royal forecast. On March 10, 2023, Prince Edward's 59th birthday, Buckingham Palace made the announcement. Prince Edward would become Duke of Edinburgh. After 24 years, the hidden promise in that 1999 statement had finally been honored. The late Queen's quiet commitment was fulfilled. Prince Philip got his wish. The long suspense ended with a birthday gift wrapped in royal language. But if you looked closely, there was still one final twist buried in the wording. The palace stated Edward would hold the title for his lifetime. That phrase sounded harmless, respectful, formal, but inside monarchy language, tiny phrases can carry huge consequences. For his lifetime meant this was not the old hereditary arrangement people assumed. It meant the title would not automatically pass to Edward's son James, Earl of Wessex. When Edward dies, the dukedom returns to the crown once again. In one elegant sentence, Charles gave the title and kept ultimate control of its future. That is where the move becomes almost surgical. Charles satisfied the memory of his parents. He avoided looking disloyal. He rewarded Edward publicly. But he also prevented another branch of the family from permanently owning one of the monarchy's most prestigious names. The title can later be reassigned by the next sovereign, likely Prince William, and many already speculate it could one day be given to Prince Louis. If that happens, the title circles neatly back into Charles's direct line. Promise honored, dynasty protected, crisis contained. It was a compromise so polished that many missed how sharp it really was. Edward received the glory, but not the dynasty. He got the recognition, but not the inheritance chain. He became Duke of Edinburgh, yet only as a temporary guardian. Some would call it fair, others would call it brilliant, and some would whisper it was the most royal solution possible. Generous on the surface, strategic underneath. For Edward personally, the moment carried real emotion. This was the same man once mocked for leaving the Royal Marines early, criticized for failed business ventures, embarrassed by television controversies, and long treated as the quiet spare nobody expected much from. Yet over 2 decades, he rebuilt himself through steady duty, public discipline, and scandal-free service. While louder royals burned headlines, Edward slowly repaired his reputation brick by brick. By the time the title arrived, it felt less like favoritism and more like delayed acknowledgement. And then there is Sophie. Through years of turbulence around the family, Sophie Rhys-Jones became one of the monarchy's most dependable public faces. Calm, consistent, professional. Together, she and Edward transformed from background figures into trusted working royals. The title did not just elevate one man. It formally crowned a couple who had outlasted scandal by refusing to feed it. Yet, even after the announcement, the story still carries a ghostly edge. Because the Duke of Edinburgh title is now living on borrowed time. When Edward passes, it disappears again. Back to the crown, back to uncertainty, back to another monarch's judgment. It could be revived. It could be reassigned. It could be retired forever. What looked like closure was really just another pause in a century-long cycle. So look at the full picture. Queen Elizabeth II hid a promise in plain sight in 1999. Prince Philip tried to secure his legacy through the son he trusted. King Charles III delayed, calculated, then delivered on terms that protected his own future line. And one day, Prince William may face the same decision all over again. Keep the title alive, pass it on, or end it quietly. That is how royal history often works. Not with shouting, not with dramatic confessions, but with tiny phrases, delayed decisions, and smiles that reveal nothing. The palace rarely tells the whole story. It leaves breadcrumbs in statements, pauses in timing, and loopholes in titles. And for those watching closely, the silence can be louder than any announcement.